We're happy that we have for our message this morning Monica Miller, who is the former pastor of First Mennonite Church here in Indianapolis and is now the interim pastor at Kalamazoo Mennonite Church in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and living in Goshen. For the focus of Monica's message this morning, she's asked that I read from Isaiah 2, verses 1 through 5, and I will be reading from the Common English Bible, which is a little bit different from the Revised Standard. If you want to follow in the Pew Bible, it's page 591. Whenever I read this particular scripture, I think about the fact that we have to kind of reinterpret scriptures for our own time and place. One of the themes of this scripture is, well, the theme is obviously turning conflict into peace, but one of the images that is used for that is turning swords into plowshares. But those of you who are connected with farming in the United States presently, we don't want to turn our swords into plowshares. We want to recycle our swords into no-till planters because we don't plow anymore. But there are many places around the earth where they do plant, so this is still relevant. This is what Isaiah, Amos' son, said concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house will be the highest of the mountains. It will be lifted above the hills. Peoples will stream to it. Many nations will go and say, "Come and let us go up to the Lord's mountain, to the house of Jacob's God, so that he may teach us his ways, and we may walk in God's paths." Instruction will come from Zion, God's word from Jerusalem. God will judge between the nations and settle disputes of mighty nations. Then they will beat their swords into iron plows and their spears into pruning tools. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They will no longer learn how to make war. Come, house of Jacob, let's walk by the Lord's light. Monica, we look forward to the message that God has for you to bring to us this morning about hope.
Thank you for that welcome, Fred. Good morning, everyone. As you said, I am Monica. I am currently the interim pastor up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but I'm only there every other Sunday. So on my off Sundays, I can guest preach for you all, for example. I really appreciate your flexibility as a congregation, but especially the tech folks for me being able to preach on Zoom today. We got enough snow up here in Goshen that most churches are canceled, and so it's nice to not have to brave the roads. So I'm grateful that technology allows us to still connect. I have come to preach for you a couple times now this year, and so it's always nice to be welcomed back again. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing this first Sunday of Advent with you. And as I was thinking about preaching on Zoom, I realized that I don't think I've actually done this before, where I am preaching on Zoom for live people primarily. I've preached on Zoom to other Zoom people, and I have pre-recorded sermons to project for live people in a room, but never actually live in this hybrid format. So this is a first for me. At any rate, it is good to be with you. And would you join me in prayer, please? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. How many of you are familiar with the nonprofit Raw Tools? They accept donated guns, decommission them, and then reforge them into garden tools or art or jewelry. Shane Claiborne was one of the co-founders in Philadelphia, and they go on tour sometimes where they haul a portable forge with them across the country to lead small rallies against gun violence. And I don't know if they've ever come to Indianapolis, but their Beating Guns tour came to Pasadena, California while I was in seminary there. And so that evening, after hearing stories from survivors of gun violence, they fired up their forge in the parking lot, and we all took turns hammering that hot red metal of what used to be an implement of violence. And the loud clang of metal on metal ringing out loud and clear, heralding the new birth of a humble garden trowel. The hammer was heavy, the blacksmith's gloves were huge and thick, and the sparks sizzled against our safety glasses. And of course, I figured it would be hard work to reforge gun metal into garden metal, but it was also slow work. It was hard and slow and patient work. And it was punctuated by the calm of reheating the metal to be malleable again. And I don't remember how long we lingered in that lot, but this visible change in the metal from beginning to end was nothing spectacular. It was noticeably flatter, noticeably changed, but still nowhere near what it was to become. And of course, if the blacksmith was just doing it himself, he would be much faster. But the long work of reforging a gun into a garden tool isn't why I'm opening this with this story. It's that it makes a difference who the smith is at the forge. After all, I know how practical blacksmithing is for all sorts of benign endeavors, but it is far enough removed from my life that other than that one time in the parking lot, I really only see blacksmiths at work in movies. And movie scenes at the forge are often just symbolic shorthand for war preparations. Smithing just gets reduced to war and violence. But I can't fully describe how meaningful it was to watch others who have had much closer shaves with gun violence than I have find catharsis in swinging that hammer with tears, with cries, and with shouts. And they beat their grief into that blob of metal. They pounded their pain into it, let their lament shape it. And the metal accepted it all and then some. And they left the forge that evening with a little more peace, a little more comfort, and a little more hope than before. And I don't think it would have been the same if they had just discarded the gun, turned around, and bought a new garden trowel. It had to be reforged. The labor of love that resurrects a tool of death into a tool of life. And it only worked because the blacksmith understood that deep in his bones. I mean, of course he did. He was towing a forge across the country. You don't do that on a whim. But he understood the resurrection power that's possible at an anvil so often associated with war. Reforming, in both senses of the word, reforming metal that was first formed for violence and reshaping it for shalom. The redemptive rebirth that can't happen any other way but at the forge. But let's take a step back. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a day when swords will be beaten into plowshares, one of the most gripping images in the Bible, which has continued to inspire us for millennia. And let's be honest with ourselves, it's a pretty rad image. And it is also barely a leap at all to see the connections between beating swords into plows and beating guns into garden tools. Like that's not even a stretch at all. That's a pretty clear connection right there. It is pretty clear that that ancient picture of peace has been reforged over the centuries, morphing and evolving and updating to continue inspiring hope in relevant ways. Because I don't know about you, but if I today watched someone beat a broadsword into a plow. It would be cool, but it just wouldn't pack the same punch, you know? It's nice and interesting and stuff, but we live in an epidemic of gun violence, and our militaries and immigration enforcement officers are armed to the teeth with artillery, not blades. Swords into plowshares tickles my imagination, but guns into garden tools grips my gut in a way that swords never could. And so I wonder what the rest of this snippet from Isaiah might have in store for us. I wonder what this word painting has buried beneath it that is harder to translate to today. Swords to guns is easy, but what about the rest of Isaiah's scene? And with this first week of Advent, where might we find hope? We have set the time machine today for almost 100 years ago. It is sometime in the 1930s, let's say 1934. And we wake up on the other side of the world in southern Iran at an archaeological dig. But everything is black and white because color has not been invented yet. Persepolis has been a famous ruin for centuries, but this, in the 1930s, is the first professional excavation here, and you're part of it. Your professor, Ants Hatzfeld, started this dig a couple years ago, and in 1934, we are still digging with no sign of stopping. You dump one last shovel full into the wheelbarrow, and as your friend wheels it away, you wipe your brow with a tired sigh. You have earned a water break, so you take a swig of water. The canteen is empty. You hop down from that ancient treasury's foundation platform that you've been working on and land with a poof of dust. And as you go refill your canteen, this time of day, you're looking for shade, but some of the only shade you'll find in this palace complex is by the eastern stairs leading up to what Ernst is calling the Apadana Palace. You make your way over there, take a seat on a dusty stair, and lean back against the shade-cooled stone. And as you lay there under the crystal clear blue sky, you ponder the carvings in the wall next to you. Intricately chiseled stonework left from the height of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, well over 2,000 years ago. And you ponder the carvings, but your mind wanders to Isaiah 2. And yes, these photos are from that specific dig in the 1930s, which was funded by the University of Chicago. So their Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures is where I am sourcing these photos from. Persepolis is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so you can go there and see all these things for yourself today if you want to. So you can consider this a little taste. These old photos show the things that I want to show you better than the modern photos on Persepolis's website. So let's take a closer look here. I would like to note I am indebted to Dr. Brent Nestler for making a connection between Isaiah 2 and these specific images carved in stone in Persepolis. Because the word images in Isaiah don't come from nowhere. They use so-called visual vocabulary common across the ancient Near East and beyond. And so I would like to take a couple minutes to look at some common examples of imperial images that Isaiah may have been reforging into prophetic images of hope. Now, Isaiah 2 wasn't responding to the specific staircase that we're going to talk about, but the stairs do have a lot of imperial symbolism, just conveniently concentrated all in one place. So would you like to geek out with me a little bit and look at some pictures of Persepolis? You don't really have a choice, so you're going to be geeking out together this morning. I have 4 details in this set of stairs that I would like to look at. So just to set the scene of these are the stairs, So you can see that there is a massive raised foundation that is just very tall. If you see on the right over here, there are some archaeologists standing there, and so you can get a sense of scale. There is not much of the palace left anymore, except a few columns, but the foundation that the palace stood on is very much intact, and these stairs in particular are in really good shape, considering it's about 2,500 years old, mostly built around the 520s BCE. So we're going to look at some details in these stairs. We're going to look a little bit over here and a little over here and further off the side of the picture as well. So here we see a bunch of people going uphill. And this is a set of stairs, so that kind of makes sense. And you can also see some trees here as well. And so these are Persian guards. They're going uphill, they're outside. So you might imagine this as a sort of symbolic or metaphorical mountain that they are going up to get to the palace at the top of the quote unquote mountain. And so I recall Isaiah reforging this symbolism in verse 2. In the days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains and shall be raised above the hills. A lot of space on the stairs and around the foundation and in general are taken up with these processions of people bringing gifts and livestock. And notice that they are coming in peace. They are not coming to fight. But you can also see that the groups are wearing different clothing from each other. And based on the distinctives of these clothing, we can actually identify who these people are, like what nations they're coming from, what nationalities they are. And so they are coming from all over the place of just different areas that the Persian Empire had control over or had influence over at this point. And so these people here on the left at the top are Harashians. They would be from present-day Afghanistan. Then below them in the middle, we have Assyrians. This is long after the Assyrian Empire's heyday, but Assyrians are still around. They would be in present-day Iraq. And then below them on the bottom, Cappadocians. Those folks lived in modern-day Turkey. And then over here on the right, these people going up the mountain, they are one of the Scythian people groups, and they would be from modern-day Ukraine and the Crimean Peninsula. And folks, that is 1,500 miles away, as the crow flies. That is like the distance from Indianapolis to Phoenix, Arizona, at a time when there are no cars, there are no telephones or internet or anything. And so for the Persian Empire to have influence that far is just really incredible in terms of imperial power. But you will notice that each of these groups is led by someone who is dressed differently than the rest of the people that they're leading. And that's because each of these leaders are Persian officials, and they're leading them by the hand very peacefully. And so it's these Persian Empire officials bringing all of these people who are bringing tributes, they're bringing taxes, they're bringing gifts. And so as far as the actual things we can see, we can identify a camel here. It's a little bit hard to tell with the shadows in the photo. And they're bringing other luxury items. And then this guy at the back that we can only see the bottom half of him, he's probably bringing some kind of animal skin, like maybe a lion or something. You can see the tail sticking down and maybe a back paw. The folks in the middle, the Assyrians, they are bringing some really awesome pots and pottery stoneware. They're also bringing 2 rams and some clothing. And I'm going to jump over to the folks on the right, the Scythians. They are bringing some horses. They're bringing shields. And I'm not sure if you can see closely enough sitting there in the room, but if you look at the photo closely, you can actually see like the wood grain of the shields that they're bringing. And then the Cappadocians on the bottom, they're also bringing horses. They are bringing some more textiles and fine clothing. And then at the end, they're a really, really awesome pair of socks. And so all of these people are bringing all of this stuff. And the foundation around the stairs and the stairs themselves are just covered in this political propaganda, displaying the immense wealth and political reach that this palace commands. And if you bear in mind that most people were illiterate, this kind of visual propaganda is the stuff that actually sinks in. That it doesn't matter if you can read or not, and it doesn't matter if you speak a totally different language, you can still recognize exactly what's going on here. Like if you were an Egyptian visiting from out of town, you would be able to walk past these stairs and see just how much power and wealth is on display here. That all of these people from all of these places would bring all of these things peacefully, quote unquote, willingly, in deference to and to curry favor with Persian leadership. And so, look how powerful they are. You don't want to get on these guys' bad side because these are all the resources they have at their disposal to get things done their way. So picking up Isaiah 2 again, the mountains of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and all the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. This scene forms the centerpiece of the stairs. It is the focal point. And we can see a king here seated, and that's his son, the prince, behind him. And they're even on a bit of a raised platform compared to everyone else. But the king is sitting there. He's also a lot larger than the other people standing around. There are 3 people in front of him. Behind him are some attendants, but there are 3 people in front of him. The first guy, who's leaning over a little bit with his hand on his lips, that is a Persian court official. You can see by his hairstyle and his headgear there, and he's got a staff as well. But he's introducing 2 people who are seeking audience with the king. And because there are 2 of them, we might assume that they probably have some kind of dispute with each other that they would like the king to settle for them. And so you have the king shown here, front and center, hearing the disputes of the people, governing them, hearing their complaints, settling judgments between them. And so before we had the Pax Romana, the peace of the Roman Empire, before that we had the Pax Persica, peace and stability under the Persian Empire, the largest empire in the world up to that point. And so who needs war anymore when you have a king like this who is governing everyone, who can just settle disputes for people peacefully since they're all in one empire? So Isaiah reforging this image of political leadership into God's role. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And now we come to one last image, and this is the most abstract to our 21st century eyes. I do want to note that what we were just looking at, this carving, probably used to be right here. It would make a lot of sense if it was here. What is currently here seems odd and awkward as scholars are looking at it. And so what we think happened was that at some point, folks removed that central carving of the king sitting there and stored it away for safekeeping over in the treasury, because it just is very out of place where it is and would fit a lot better here. It's the right size. and all that stuff. But that's not the important part in this image. What's important is what would be right above it, which is this right here. And this is over everything on the stairs. And this, I mean, it looks like a circle, but I'll blow it up so you can see a little bit better, and that's nice, all pixelated and everything. But you can see it's a circle with some wings. And that is what we call a winged sun disk. Because what is the sun? It is a giant circle or disk of light that flies across the sky. And so sun gods were usually pretty close to the top, if not at the top, of any given pantheon of deities. Storm gods were also up there. Storm gods like Baal was a Canaanite storm god, because you need sun, you need rain. But the god of suns, the sun god that these Persians revered was named Ahura Mazda. And the name of their religion was Zoroastrianism, which is actually still around today. There aren't very many adherents, but there are some still. But this winged sun disk was a really common image, not just in Persia, but all over the place. So to give you a taste for that, this is from Egypt, and we can see the god Horus sitting here with his falcon head. He's got his scepter there, sitting on a raised throne, just like the Persian king was. And there is a circle above his head. And Horus was worshipped for a long time, and over the course of that time, folks worshipped him for different reasons, but at different points, he was the god of the sky and of the sun. And so it would make sense that we see this circle above his head, which is a sun disk. There are no wings on this particular one, but that's what the circle is. And so at first glance, it's just like, oh, it's a random circle. But no, it is a sun disk, and it's significant for that reason. So we have this very common symbol for a deity, which is a sun that is shining over all of the processions of people that are coming. It's shining over the king who is sitting there, handing out justice for the people as everyone goes up this quote-unquote mountain. And so I'm reminded of Isaiah's finale in this image. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. So as we look at what the stairs look like today, if you were to go and visit them, I hope you enjoyed that little visual analysis, at least half as much as I did. But I hope it has become clear how the prophet Isaiah wasn't just painting an idyllic scene out of nowhere, but that he was taking imperial propaganda. Again, not these exact stairs, but just political propaganda in general, the specific images and metaphors that empires like to use. That Isaiah was using those and flipping them on their heads, reforging them into a mirror image, the same but completely reversed. And so as we ponder the iconography that we've just looked at, I would like to read verses 2 through 5 again. So I stop sharing my screen here. Okay. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Okay, but Monica, So what we're left with is like a parallel empire in a lot of ways, reforging the same imperial imagery into an empire with God at the top. Is that actually encouraging? Like, is it just a Christian empire, or in Isaiah's case, a Jewish empire? Like, is that really good news? Because that sounds kind of like bad news, actually. There is this new empire on the horizon, a recapitulation of empires we've already seen, a repeat of empires we've already experienced, a reforging of empires we've already survived. That does not give me hope. To see this picture in Isaiah, chock full of imperial imagery, recast with Yahweh at the helm, to read a description that includes all the primary characteristics of empire, an empire with no boundaries, frontiers, but no outer boundaries. It is the center of gravity for the entire world. It's held up as the culmination of all time. It's the pinnacle of human history and civilization. And it's established permanently, forever, an eternal empire. And there are these permanent differentials in power between the ruler and the vassal nations and people, with one having absolute power over the rest. And the cultural hegemony for uniformity, the cultural narratives dissolving into one way of doing things, one set of values, one set of beliefs set by the one at the top. And so if you dissent, so help you God. Except that God is probably not going to help you with that one, because God is at the top deciding all these things. This kind of doesn't sound like good news anymore. And perhaps that would be the case if it was just another one of us humans in charge. But that's not what Isaiah describes. Isaiah describes a scene where God is in control, but this isn't some random deity. This is a God that we know to a degree, a God we are familiar with to a degree, a God who came near in Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us. Isaiah's scene portrays people wanting to learn more about God in order to walk in God's ways. And we know that the way of Jesus is not like the way of empire. The way of Jesus is so very different from the way empire does things. Because we know, if we know Jesus, we know that Isaiah's mirror image of empire will not play out like just another one of those. That empire's logic is not how God does things. And so while the scene may look similar, we know that it's as different as guns and garden tools. It is the end of one, reforged into the other. The world of empire that we know, reforged. Because if Isaiah didn't use the imperial images that he knew, it wouldn't have packed the same punch. It would have tickled the imagination, but it wouldn't have grabbed the gut. This was not written from a position of power, position of military might that could just enact all of these policies on its own tomorrow with frightening speed. This was written from a position of looking out the window and watching those hulking behemoths bulldoze the nation next to you while you try desperately to not make eye contact. A position of keep your head down and don't make waves. A position where you're suffocating in the maniacal machinations of heavyweights clashing and you're just trying to make it out of the crossfire, just trying to not get crushed underfoot. And that is not the kind of soil where hope blooms. And so what if all of this empire stuff wasn't in anybody's hands anymore? Not in the Persians' hands, not in the Babylonians, Assyrian, or Egyptian hands. What if it was in no human hands? What if we took all the responsibilities of empire and outsourced them far away, where none of us could ever reach anymore? What if we put all of that in God's hands and put empire out of a job? And to remove all doubt, let's paint a picture of what empire normally looks like and not just scribble it out. Let's reforge it to make it clear that there is no room for two. Isaiah says there is nothing left for empire to do. There is no purpose left for empire to carry out. There is no reason left for empire to exist because God is here now. You're done, empire. Goodbye forever. Because that's the God we know, right? That's the Jesus that we know, right? God is putting empire out of business because God's business is in rebirthing new life from the old, mending what is broken, and reconciling what has fallen apart. God is a God of plowshares and garden tools, and Jesus is the blacksmith at Isaiah's anvil, reforging the images of death into life, reforging the empire of earth into the kingdom of heaven, a work that is already started, but not yet done, a work in progress. And here we are, treading water in the midst of it, painfully aware of how big that not yet is. And boy, am I glad it's Advent, that Isaiah returns to us every year for another round of reforging, another leg of the Jesus tour, a generous and compassionate reminder that reforging is hard, slow, and patient work, that it's going to take a little longer. But friends, don't you remember that it's already begun? Empire's expiration date is 1 year closer than it was before. And I'll remind you every year, as long as it takes, and as often as you need, to keep the roots of hope alive. That, my friends, is an Advent hope reforged.